Hey guys, tonight we step quietly, not gracefully, more like a sleepy stumble, into the dim, drafty corners of medieval life, where you, yes you, somehow get drafted into the world of assassins. It's not glamorous, no dramatic music, no rooftop leap in slow motion. Just you, a cold morning, and a very unimpressed man telling you that you look sneaky enough. You probably won't survive this, but hey, that's kind of the vibe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, let me know your location and local time in the comments so I can picture where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself on a narrow street that smells like damp straw and something that might be soup or might be sewage, hard to tell. You're just trying to pick up some bread when a stranger taps your shoulder, firmly enough to be concerning, lightly enough to be suspicious. He looks you up and down with the expression of someone assessing a second-hand turnip. Somewhere behind you, a dog coughs. Yes, coughs. Good luck getting that sound out of your imagination. What you don't know yet is that medieval assassins rarely had the dramatic, ritual-filled recruitment that modern stories like to imagine. There's no whispered ceremony in candlelight, no ancient oath carved on stone tablets. The mainstream historical fact is pretty simple. Most people who did covert jobs in medieval societies were pulled in because someone noticed they were small, quiet, desperate, or owed money. Sometimes all four. So when the stranger says you keep your head down nicely, you're not flattered. You're confused, which is honestly your baseline setting. As you follow him through the winding alleys, you catch every sensory detail. The slick cobblestones under your boots, the heavy smell of rain-soaked wool hanging from laundry lines, the faint metallic tang of someone hammering horseshoes nearby. Your nose is working overtime. Always good to keep that part of you awake, since everything else is about to get very tired. You ask who he is. He ignores the question. You ask where you're going. He ignores that too. Eventually he mutters, "We need someone who won't be missed," which frankly feels rude. A little accurate, sure, but rude. Historians still argue whether medieval assassin networks were formal guilds, loose underground groups, or just clusters of people with flexible morals and excellent night vision. Whatever the truth was, you're walking right into it. He leads you into a dim workshop where three other men are sharpening knives in the least reassuring way possible, slowly, deliberately, with the expression of people who think too much about angles. They turn to look at you. One nods quietly, another grunts, the third sneezes directly into his sleeve and goes back to sharpening. Real professional atmosphere. A woman enters from the back room, calm, stern, and carrying the clipboard equivalent of the Middle Ages, a wax tablet. She studies you like she's deciding whether you're a new recruit or a regrettable mistake. Finally, she says, "Can you climb?" You respond with an uneasy, "I can climb some things," which is apparently good enough to get you hired into the worst job you never applied for. In some regions, people working covert jobs weren't chosen for bravery or agility. They were chosen because they were already involved in the town's rumor mill. Someone who knew everyone's business could slip into the shadows more easily than someone who stuck out. Congratulations, you, with your innate nosiness and quiet footsteps, you're perfect. Your orientation session involves being handed a dull knife and told, "Try not to drop this on your foot." Not exactly a motivational speech. You nod seriously, though inside you're wondering if dropping it might be safer long term. The dullness of the knife is not symbolic. These people don't waste good metal on newcomers. You're shown a trunk of basic gear, a faded cloak that smells like onions, a pair of soft shoes with suspicious stains, and a ratty shoulder bag. You're also given a small wooden token with a scratched symbol, your proof that you belong to these people now. As tokens go, it looks like something a bored child carved while waiting for chores to begin. As you stand there, cloak draped over one arm, you realize how quiet the room has become. Everyone watches you with the tired patience of people who have seen 100 nervous recruits come and go. Mostly go, permanently. Your handler, the man who dragged you here, motions for you to walk with him to the back door. He explains that medieval towns are full of people who live invisible lives. Lamplighters, rat catchers, washerwomen who hear every whispered argument, messengers who pass unnoticed through every gate. That's who we are, he says, just another part of the scenery. No one looks twice. You nod along, taking in the faint drizzle outside and the soft drip of water from rooftops. You're already blending into the gloom. That's comforting in a weird way, like slipping into a blanket made of quiet. As you walk with him through a narrow passageway, he teaches you one of the job's first rules. Don't stand still too long in one place. In medieval towns, anyone who lingers without purpose looks suspicious, and suspicious people get questioned, grabbed, or used as scapegoats for things they didn't even do, like stealing chickens or offending someone's goat. And yes, it's actually documented that goats had reputations. You don't want to get on the wrong side of a medieval goat. The handler points out different hiding spots: the gap between two houses, the dark corner near a water trough, the shadow under a wooden staircase. You don't choose the shadows, he says with the tone of someone quoting ancient wisdom. The shadows choose. He pauses halfway through, frowns, and says, "Actually, that's nonsense. You choose the shadows. Just step into one." You do. It's damp and smells faintly of cabbage. But he seems proud. As he explains the job further, you realize that assassin in this world doesn't always mean dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it means surveillance, relaying messages, or nudging events quietly. Medieval politics ran on whispers as much as swords. But you also get the sense that you might be asked to do more than whisper eventually, something requiring that dull knife you're still gripping like a nervous potato peeler. He tells you that every job is different, every target unpredictable, and every night full of surprises, mostly unpleasant ones. He says the risk is constant, the pay inconsistent, and the hours terrible. You ask jokingly, "Does this come with dental?" He looks at you blankly. Dentistry hasn't been invented yet in any comforting form. Still, even with the rain dripping down the back of your neck and the realization that you've accidentally joined the least appealing medieval club possible, there's something oddly calming about stepping into this strange new life. It's simple, quiet, shadowy, the kind of job where no one expects you to smile or make small talk. The handler gives your shoulder a single pat and says, "Welcome to the work." It's not warm, but it's definite. You belong here, at least for now. And just like that, you're in. You wake the next morning to the dull ache of sleeping on a straw mattress that has very strong opinions about poking you in 17 different places at once. The room you've been offered, temporarily, they insist, as if you'll be promoted to slightly less lumpy mattress any day now, is little more than a box of cold air with a door. You stretch, try to convince your spine that it still belongs to your body, and shuffle out into the early light where your handler waits with the expression of someone who's already tired of your existence. Training begins immediately. There's no pep talk, no cup of something warm, no "here's how to be safe on the job." Instead, the handler tosses you a sandbag the weight of a disgruntled toddler and grunts, "Carry that quietly." You try, you fail. The bag thuds to the ground with all the grace of a falling brick. A pigeon nearby is so offended it flies away mid-breakfast. The handler sighs deeply. Again. And so you begin, the quiet misery of medieval assassin training.
you soon realize that most of this job involves doing extremely uncomfortable things for extremely long periods of time. Take the art of moving silently. Sounds mystical, right? A dance of shadows, a ballet of footsteps? No. It's an hour of tiptoeing across uneven planks while your handler watches and occasionally smacks the wood with a stick to see if you flinch. Spoiler, you always flinch. As you shuffle, you notice a historical fact they don't tell you in dramatic stories. Medieval buildings creak constantly. The wood expands, contracts, sighs, complains, and gossips. It tells everyone exactly where you are. Even master infiltrators can't stop the house from tattling, your handler says, shrugging. Best to move when the wind's noisy. You look outside. No wind. Perfect. Patience. Lots of patience. Endless patience. The kind that makes you wonder if time itself has paused out of sympathy for your boredom. They sit you on a stool in a dark room and tell you to observe the environment. The environment consists of a wall, a very old wall. A wall that, if it had feelings, would be offended by how closely you're staring at it. After 10 minutes, you start counting cracks. After 20, you assign personalities to the cracks. By the 30-minute mark, you're imagining the wall giving you advice about life. You tell no one about this. The quirky tidbit here is that some medieval training systems, particularly for spies or stealth workers, really did involve long stretches of doing nothing but watching, listening, and waiting. The idea was to teach you to pick up subtle shifts in noise or movement. Or maybe the idea was simply that the instructors were lazy. Historians still argue whether these exercises were essential training or just hazing disguised as discipline. Eventually, your handler returns and asks, "What did you observe?" You consider telling him about the wall's emotional arc, but decide to simply say, "I heard a mouse." He nods approvingly. Apparently, this is the correct answer. Then comes the climbing. If you had imagined yourself scaling stone walls with spider-like grace, prepare to let that dream go. Medieval walls weren't designed with handholds in mind. They were designed to keep people exactly like you off them. You attempt to climb the training wall, a structure built out of leftover stones and the instructor's spite, and manage to get about halfway up before your foot slips and you slide down like a sack of potatoes being dumped from a wagon. Your handler claps once, slowly. At least you didn't scream. That's the bar? That is the bar. You try again, fingers digging into gaps between stones, toes searching for purchase on uneven surfaces. You clamber and wobble and cling like a terrified tree frog. You make it to the top. You hoist yourself over. You celebrate with a quiet yes under your breath. Then you realize the other side is the drop side, the tall drop side. Your handler calls up, "Jump," quietly. You consider your life decisions. The wind gives a sympathetic whistle, though it may just be the sound of your dignity deflating. You jump. You do not land quietly. In fact, your landing is accompanied by a noise that can only be described as boot meets gravel meets pain. But when you stand, brushing dust from your cloak, your handler gives you a rare nod of approval. "Not terrible," he says. Coming from him, this is the equivalent of a standing ovation. Next is stealth food practice. Apparently, eating quietly is a vital skill for someone who might need to hide in kitchens or storerooms. You're handed a bowl of barley porridge and told, "Don't make a sound." You stare at the porridge, at the wooden spoon, at the instructor who seems both confident and bored. You take a bite. The spoon scrapes the bowl with the subtlety of a thunderclap. The handler winces. Again. You take another bite, slower this time. The porridge drips audibly. The handler sighs. Again. By the end of the exercise, you've eaten half the bowl and produced enough sound effects to qualify as a one-person Foley team. Then comes a test where you must walk across a courtyard without alerting the chickens roaming freely around the area. If even one chicken squawks, you fail. Chickens, it turns out, are nature's alarm systems. You take a careful step, a soft rustle, a tiny scrape. A chicken looks up suspiciously. You freeze. The chicken freezes. You breathe out. The chicken squawks anyway. Failure. You attempt the walk again. This time, you're convinced the chickens are doing it on purpose. And honestly, they might be. That's a scholarly debate waiting to happen. Historians still argue whether medieval chickens were naturally dramatic or simply bored. By midday, you're exhausted. Training is relentless, not glamorous, not thrilling. Just the reality that being unseen requires more effort than being seen. Your legs ache, your hands throb, your eyes burn from squinting in dim rooms and sunlit courtyards alike. But you begin to notice something. You're getting slightly better, slightly quieter, slightly less terrible at climbing. And with that progress comes a tiny spark of confidence. Not enough to brag about, obviously, but enough to keep you going. Your final task of the day involves shadowing another recruit without letting them know. You follow them through market stalls, past cheesemakers and cloth merchants, weaving between crowds carrying baskets of fish or armfuls of firewood. The smells blend together: fried onions, wet wool, and a hint of manure that refuses to be ignored. People shout, argue, laugh, haggle. Children dart around your legs, goats bleat, someone drops a jug that shatters loudly. All this noise is your ally. You slip through it like smoke, clumsy smoke, but still. You step where people aren't looking, pause when someone shifts, blend into the motion of the crowd. You manage to stay behind your target the entire time, and when your handler finally taps your shoulder with a quiet, "Good," you feel a tiny bloom of pride warm your chest. That pride lasts approximately 6 seconds. Because then he adds, "Now do it without touching anyone." You glance at the dense crowd, you look back at him, you consider running away forever, but instead you take a deep breath, adjust your onion-scented cloak, and step forward again. Training isn't glorious. It's not even fun. It's cold mornings, aching muscles, embarrassing mistakes, constant corrections. Hours of boredom followed by 30 seconds of demanding focus. But as the light fades and you limp back to your straw mattress, you realize something comforting. This slow, miserable practice is shaping you, quietly, gradually. You're learning to move in ways you never have, to see what you'd normally overlook, to exist in spaces without disturbing them. It's miserable, but it's working. And the shadows are starting to feel just a little more like home. By the time the next morning drags itself into existence, you're beginning to suspect that medieval assassins didn't rely on skill so much as sheer stubbornness. Your muscles ache in places you didn't know existed. Your fingers feel like overcooked noodles. Your cloak still smells faintly of onions. But today you finally get to see your tools. You imagine sleek daggers, elegant crossbows, smoke bombs packed with mysterious powders. Maybe even a grappling hook that actually works. Something cool, something dramatic, something that makes all this training worth it. You're wrong.
Your handler leads you into a small armory that looks more like a shed where someone stores tools they plan to repair eventually. Dust clings to every surface. A draft slips under the door. Your handler waves a hand at the assortment of objects laid out on a warped wooden table and says, "Pick one." What lies before you is disappointing. The first thing you see is a dagger whose blade bends slightly to the left as if it's shy. You pick it up, give it a gentle shake, and the handle rattles. Not a reassuring detail. Your handler shrugs. "Steel's expensive," he says. "Best recruits start with whatever didn't break last week." Historically speaking, here comes your mainstream fact, many medieval covert workers didn't use impressive custom weapons. They used whatever they could afford or acquire discreetly. Small knives, cheap short swords, or repurposed kitchen tools. Romantic? No. Practical? Barely.
You sigh and return the bent dagger to its spot. Next, you try a small wooden crossbow. It looks promising until you realize the bowstring is frayed. Not fraying, frayed, as in one deep breath away from snapping. You pull it back gently, like someone touching an antique vase they absolutely cannot afford to break. And your handler immediately says, "Too slow, target's gone." You nod and set the crossbow down before it decides to explode in your hands. There's also a small collection of throwing knives. Are these balanced, you ask? Your handler thinks for a moment and then responds with, "They exist." Not the reassurance you hoped for. You pick one up. It feels both too light and too heavy at the same time. You give it a cautious toss toward a wooden dummy in the corner. The knife leaves your hand, turns in midair, and smacks the dummy flat against its side with all the lethality of a soggy biscuit. The dummy, unimpressed, leans slightly as if trying to leave the room. Your handler pats your shoulder. "Aim for improvement," he says, which is one of those vague pieces of guidance people give when they know you're doomed. As you continue browsing, you come across a peculiar clay pot with a stopper. You ask what it is. Your handler says, "Something that smells terrible when opened, good for distractions." He doesn't elaborate. You choose not to open it. On the far end of the table sits a spool of rope. It looks sturdy enough, and you brighten a little. Rope is useful. Rope is classic. Rope is... Your handler interrupts your optimism by saying, "Don't trust it too much. Last recruit's rope snapped halfway down a wall. He survived, but dented the ground a bit." You place the rope down very gently. There's also a grappling hook, sort of. It's 3 iron prongs welded together at slightly wrong angles. It looks like something someone forged while having an argument. You lift it, and immediately the hook wobbles. You lower it slowly. Another fun fact, quirky but true, is that some medieval tools were indeed made quickly and cheaply. Blacksmiths had other priorities: horseshoes, weapons for real soldiers, nails, hinges, farm equipment. The covert community often got the leftover metal or repurposed kitchen utensils. There are even accounts of spies using sharpened hairpins or modified tent stakes. You're starting to think the bent dagger might actually be the high-quality item here. Your handler finally hands you something with ceremony, a sheathed knife about the length of your forearm. "This one is yours," he says. You draw it. It's okay, not great, but okay. The blade is straight, the handle doesn't rattle, there's a slight chip on one edge, but otherwise it looks almost trustworthy. You allow yourself a tiny smile. "Don't get attached," your handler adds. "Blades get lost, broken, or stuck in things you don't want to reach into again." The smile fades. Next, they have you test the tools. Not on people, thankfully, but on practice targets, sacks of grain, bundles of reeds, and the occasional hanging slab of something that might be meat, but could also be a mystery object from the cellar. Hard to say. You practice quiet strikes, quick slashes, controlled stabs. Your wrist aches long before the lesson ends. The knife seems to get heavier every minute, as though resenting you. Your handler demonstrates each technique with the tired confidence of a man who's done this too often. You try to mimic him, you fail. He corrects your stance, you fail less. One throw lands perfectly, blade embedded cleanly into the straw dummy. You beam. Then the dummy falls over backward, making a loud thump. Your handler says, "Good throw, bad follow-through." You apologize to the dummy. The next portion of training is learning how to conceal your tools. Medieval clothing is not built for subtlety. Cloaks flap, tunics bunch, belts creak. Every step sounds like you're carrying a small squeaky orchestra. Your handler shows you how to tuck the knife into a hidden fold of fabric. He demonstrates slipping a small blade into a boot, though he notes this is uncomfortable and occasionally results in toe regret. You attempt it anyway. You regret it immediately. There's also a technique for hiding tools in your sleeve. You test it by lifting your arm experimentally. The blade promptly falls out, clattering onto the floor. A nearby apprentice looks over and snickers. You pretend not to notice. Your handler rubs his temples. Again, he says. You work on this for what feels like hours, adjusting, sliding, positioning, repositioning. Every so often, the blade shifts in exactly the wrong way, reminding you that medieval assassins didn't just risk being caught, they risked stabbing themselves by accident.
During a short break, another trainee shows you what he calls my favorite tool. He opens his palm to reveal a rock. Just a rock. Smooth, round, entirely ordinary. It's silent, he says proudly. Reliable. You nod politely and back away slowly. By now, the reality of the job is settling in. Your tools are unreliable, clunky, unpredictable, and you're expected to rely on them anyway. This doesn't dampen your spirits so much as wring them out and hang them to dry.
But you notice something interesting. Despite the primitive equipment, despite the clattering blades and frayed bowstrings, your handler never complains. He accepts the flaws, works around them, teaches you how to adapt. A tool is only as good as its user, he says, and if the tool is bad, you learn faster. You wonder if this is encouragement or an insult, possibly both. As evening approaches, you're given one final test. You must take the knife they assign to you, move through a dim corridor, and strike a designated target without making too much noise. Too much noise is vague. You ask for clarification. Your handler simply says, "You'll know." Great. You step into the corridor. The floorboards shift under your weight. A gust of air from an open window brushes against your cloak. You feel the knife warm in your hand from your grip. Slowly, steadily, you take one step, then another. Your heartbeat feels loud enough to echo. You reach the target, an old piece of padded armor hung from a hook, and deliver the quietest, cleanest strike of the day. You turn to your handler, expecting a rare compliment. He leans in and whispers, "Not terrible." You beam, because from him, that's high praise. Despite the flimsy tools, despite the awkward weaponry, despite the weight of everything feeling slightly wrong in your hands, you're learning, you're adjusting, you're discovering that the real strength isn't the blade. It's your ability to keep going, even when everything around you seems determined to contradict your plans. And while you may not trust the grappling hook, or the rope, or the clay pot of mysterious smells, you're starting to trust yourself, just a little. Which, in the medieval assassin business, might be the most important tool of all. You would think, after days of wandering these old roads, sleeping on thin mats, and learning to mimic the polite nods of the local villagers, that blending into ancient society would become second nature. But it doesn't, not really. No matter how carefully you fold the tunic, no matter how slowly you chew the barley bread so you don't look like someone who just discovered carbohydrates, there is always something, some little detail that feels slightly off. And as you drift further into this quiet journey through the past, you start to realize that blending in is less about deception and more about easing into a rhythm that isn't yours. The morning begins as most mornings do in this new world, with a soft light filtering through woven shutters and the muffled clatter of pots in the courtyard. The family you're staying with wakes long before sunrise, but they tolerate your slower pace, giving you small tasks that even a person with no historical training can't ruin too badly. They hand you a basket, point toward the well, or ask you to carry grain to the small storeroom. These are simple, rhythmic tasks, the kinds of chores that societies have repeated for thousands of years. But even now, you catch yourself hesitating just long enough for someone to raise an eyebrow. Carrying water from the well is easy enough, but you forget to brace the jug against your hip the way everyone else does. You hold it awkwardly with both hands, and the neighbor woman, whose entire existence seems dedicated to silently judging others, makes a soft clicking sound with her tongue. Not rude, not quite disapproving, but definitely the ancient equivalent of a modern side eye. To blend in, you try to imitate what you see around you.
You watch how people walk with a deliberate, grounded sway. You study the way they tie their sandals with effortless muscle memory. You pay attention to the rhythm of their greetings, a quiet nod for acquaintances, a palm over the heart for someone respected, a softer gaze for elders. But even as you mimic these gestures, a part of you remains aware of yourself, as if carrying a small lantern of self-consciousness that never fully dims. At breakfast, you attempt to sit as they do, knees drawn up, feet tucked under, but your muscles protest, and you find yourself shifting awkwardly every few minutes. You stir your porridge too quickly, creating a spiraling motion that draws a glance from the eldest son. No one says anything. They are patient, polite, but there's a tiny smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, as if he knows you are still learning to inhabit their world. Blending in, you discover, is less about behaving perfectly and more about shrinking any differences into small enough shapes that they no longer stand out. It means doing things the slow way, the quiet way, the way things have been done since long before your time. Later in the day, you join a group of villagers walking to the fields. You've seen them do this many times, walking with baskets balanced on hips, chatting lightly about the weather and the harvest. Today the air is cool, and a low mist clings to the edges of the road. The others talk in gentle tones, but you say very little. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you're still trying to avoid revealing your very unancient vocabulary. You nod and smile, and when someone points out the clouds gathering over the hills, you respond with a safe, universally timeless phrase. Yes, looks like rain. It seems to work. No strange looks, no raised eyebrows, no suspicious murmuring. For a brief moment, it feels like you've finally slipped into place. But then you stumble. Not over a rock or a tree root, but over etiquette. One of the farmers tells a small joke, something about goats, a missing bucket, and a neighbor who talks too loudly. Everyone laughs politely, offering small smiles and a few soft chuckles. You, however, laugh too hard, a full, modern, automatic laugh that echoes just a little louder than the moment requires. Heads turn. The farmer pauses mid-step. You quickly soften your expression, letting your smile fade into something milder, something that fits the gentle humor of the ancient world. The others relax again, but you feel the warm flush of embarrassment creeping up your neck. In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing. But in a quiet, rhythm-driven society where people move with unspoken rules, even your laughter can reveal that you are not from here. As the day stretches on, you participate in simple tasks, tying bundles of herbs, sorting grain, carrying tools, but your attempts to blend in continue to falter in small, accidental ways. You use your left hand when everyone else uses their right. You step aside too quickly for an elder, when the custom here is to remain still and let them pass around you. And when someone offers you a cup of watered wine, you instinctively give a polite thank you, forgetting that gratitude here is shown with a subtle dip of the head instead of spoken words. Still, despite your awkwardness, the villagers remain kind. They seem amused by your differences rather than offended by them. There is a soft generosity in the way they correct you with gestures instead of words, in the way they repeat motions slowly until you understand. No one expects perfection. They simply expect presence. And gradually, presence is what you learn to offer. By afternoon, the work is done, and the village returns to its gentle rhythm. People gather in small clusters, weaving baskets, repairing tools, chatting about the state of the fields. You sit under the shade of an old olive tree, watching the wind ripple through its leaves. A few children wander over, studying you with curious eyes. One asks why you tie your belt differently. Another wants to know why you always look at your feet when you walk instead of scanning the horizon like everyone else. Their questions are innocent, not accusatory. They observe your oddities the way they might observe a strange bird perched in the branches. Something interesting, harmless, worth noticing. You answer them carefully, offering explanations that fit within the boundaries of this time. Just a habit, you say. I'm still learning. And that, more than anything, seems to satisfy them. As the sun sinks lower, casting long shadows across the village, a quiet sense of acceptance settles over the community. They've seen your awkwardness, your hesitation, your mistakes, and yet they've welcomed you, gently absorbing you into their world without demanding perfection. Blending in, you realize, isn't about disappearing into the fabric of the past. It's about softening your edges enough that the pattern of the present can weave around you. And so, as evening settles in and the air cools, you walk through the village with a little less self-consciousness than before. Your steps match the slow cadence of the others. Your gestures feel a bit more natural. Your silence feels comfortable instead of strained. You still stand out, of course, you always will. But the villagers have begun to treat you not as an outsider to be puzzled over, but as someone who is simply different. And in a world where life is slow, steady, and deeply communal, being different is not a barrier. It is a small detail in a much larger tapestry. Blending in, it turns out, is not about becoming invisible. It is about learning to belong, even if imperfectly. There comes a point in every journey, no matter how accidental or extraordinary, when the world around you begins to do the teaching quietly. Not through grand events or dramatic revelations, but through small, almost invisible rhythms of ordinary life. After days of living in this ancient village, fumbling through customs, learning to carry water without sloshing it everywhere, nodding at the right times, you begin to notice that the lessons you're receiving no longer come from explanations or corrections. They come from the silence, from watching, from existing within a world that moves with steady purpose. The first lesson comes in the early morning hours, long before the village stirs. You wake to the faint sounds of movement in the courtyard, the soft brush of broom bristles, the shuffle of sandals, the clink of pottery. At first, you thought you were waking before everyone else, but you quickly learned that in this world, you are the late riser. Daily life begins before the sun even considers rising, because much of the work that sustains these people needs the cooler hours of dawn. Still wrapped in your cloak, you peek through the doorway and see the mother of the household sweeping the ground with slow, deliberate strokes. Her movement is unhurried, almost meditative. Each pass of the broom follows the exact path of the one before it, not because it must, but because familiarity has woven a quiet harmony into her body. Watching her, you realize the first truth. Here, work is not something to be conquered. It is something to enter, something that shapes the rhythm of life rather than interrupts it. Later in the morning, she hands you a wooden bowl filled with damp grain and gestures toward the small stone grinder. You've watched her and her daughters use it many times, pressing, circling, pushing, gathering, circling again. The same motion repeated until the grains become flour. Today, she motions for you to try. At first, your movements are clumsy. You press too hard, then too lightly. You try to speed up the process and quickly discover that speed only makes the grains spill out the edges. The mother chuckles softly, not unkindly, and places her hands over yours for a moment, guiding your motion until the pressure feels right. Then she steps back and lets you find the rhythm on your own. There is a moment, maybe several minutes in, when your breathing begins to match the slow grind of the stone, when the repetition becomes soothing, when you stop thinking about technique and simply move. And in that quiet, circular motion, you discover the second lesson. Life is full of simple tasks that become peaceful only when you release the need to rush. The villagers do not rush. They do not multitask. They are never distracted by lists of unfinished chores. They simply do what the moment requires, returning again and again to the work that feeds them, clothes them, shelters them. There is no pride in efficiency, no need to prove productivity. Work is not a measure of worth here.
It is simply part of being alive. The third lesson arrives at midday, when the sun sits high overhead and the fields shimmer in a heat that even the cicadas seem to respect. The villagers retreat into shaded porches and cool interior rooms, not to nap necessarily, but to be still. The children lie on woven mats. The elders sit quietly while the younger adults repair tools or mend clothing. There is conversation, but it is sparse, unforced. The heat mandates stillness, and the people accept it. You sit under the olive tree where you often find yourself in the afternoons. A few villagers join you. One man sharpens a blade using a stone. The sound is soft and rhythmic, like the scraping of a bird's talon on bark. Another woman sits with a basket of beans, snapping them one by one into a clay bowl. The snapping becomes a kind of quiet percussion beneath the day's slow hum. It's in this stillness that you learn the third lesson. Rest is not something to earn in this world. It is simply a natural part of the day. The ancient world, bound to daylight and seasons, cannot afford constant motion. And so rest becomes a communal act, a shared pause that everyone respects. You try to follow their example. Instead of filling the silence with questions or commentary, you settle into the moment. You listen to the tiny sounds, the soft scrape of the sharpening stone, the distant bleating of goats, the slow, deliberate exhale of someone resting beside you. For the first time, you feel yourself fully blending into this gentle midday stillness, not because you are trying to blend in, but because your body is learning the pace of this place. By late afternoon, the village awakens again. People return to the fields, to the loom, to the hearth. You walk with a group of women to gather fresh herbs from a small garden near the edge of the settlement. The garden is a simple place. Rows of mint, thyme, fennel, and a few struggling onions. The soil is dry, cracked in places, but these women tend the plants with the same care you might give to something fragile and precious. They show you how to harvest the herbs gently, pinching stems above the new growth so the plant can recover. You mimic their motions carefully, listening as they explain the subtle differences between herbs used for food and those used for illness. Their knowledge is deep, rooted in generations of trial and error. Nothing is written down. Everything is passed from memory to memory, spoken softly like a secret shared between friends. Here you learn the fourth lesson. Knowledge is not always something you acquire alone. Sometimes it is something you inherit from those who carry the world in their hands. You carry back a basket of herbs, their scents mixing in the warm air, earthy, sharp, soothing. The villagers thank you, not because your contribution is significant, but because participation itself holds value here. Every task, no matter how small, is part of a wider network of shared living. As evening approaches, the village gathers for a simple meal. Clay cups of watered wine, bread made from the grain you helped grind, a stew of lentils and herbs simmering in a pot that has been tended all day. The family invites you to sit with them again. You've learned by now to sit comfortably on the ground, to accept food with a nod instead of a spoken thanks. This meal feels different, not because the food has changed, but because you have. You eat slowly, savoring the warm richness of the stew, noticing how the flavors are shaped by the earth, the weather, the effort of hands you now recognize. The villagers talk quietly among themselves. Their conversations drift in and out, not demanding your attention, not expecting participation. It's here, around this simple meal, that the final lesson of the day settles over you. Community is not built through perfect conformity or flawless etiquette. It's built through shared time, shared tasks, shared silence, through days spent doing the same small things beside the same familiar faces. The villagers don't expect you to become one of them. They don't forget that you are different, but they accept you fully within the boundaries of their world. And somehow, without meaning to, you've learned to accept their way of living too, not out of obligation, but out of an unexpected, growing appreciation for the gentle steadiness of their lives. As dusk deepens and the world softens into shadow, you feel something you haven't felt since arriving here, a quiet sense of belonging. Imperfect, yes, but real. The quiet lessons of this ancient place have woven themselves into your days, not through instruction, but through presence, through simply being here. You don't realize how spoiled you've been until the moment someone hands you a rolled-up map, a lukewarm flask of water, and a pair of shoes that feel like they've been crafted specifically to blister your feet. This, your instructor informs you with the enthusiasm of a man giving away free pastries, is your first real assignment to the outside world. Which sounds exciting until you learn that your assignment is not dramatic, heroic, or even moderately impressive. No, your assignment is to walk. Every assassin, you're told, must learn the art of disappearing into open roads, forests, and river trails. Horses draw attention. Elaborate caravans scream wealth. And assassins, especially the thoroughly unimportant apprentices like you, are not supposed to scream anything except poor, harmless, slightly tired traveler just trying to mind my business. So you sling your pack over your shoulder, adjust the two stiff shoes, and begin what will quickly become your least favorite form of transportation: hiking. The road leaving the training compound is uneven, pocked with puddles from last night's rain, and covered with the kind of mud that clings lovingly to your ankles like it's hoping you'll stay forever. You trudge forward anyway, because every assassin must be able to travel long distances without drawing suspicion, breaking down, or loudly complaining, though you are absolutely doing the third one internally. The air is cool, still carrying the earthy smell of damp soil. Birds flit between branches overhead, singing with an optimism you cannot relate to. The morning sun is just creeping over the horizon, illuminating the light mist rising from the forest floor. It would be beautiful if your backpack didn't already feel like it was storing a family of bricks. A few miles in, your feet begin staging a rebellion. The shoes, clearly designed by someone who believed comfort was a sign of weakness, start to rub against the sides of your toes. It's only a matter of time before blisters form. And as you stumble over another route for the third time, you begin to understand one of the great truths of medieval espionage. Most of the job isn't glamorous rooftop chases or daring nighttime escapes. It's walking, endless walking, and the occasional deeply philosophical debate with yourself about why you didn't choose a career involving chairs. A historical reality drifts through your mind. The fact that people in the Middle Ages did walk nearly everywhere. Many never traveled more than 20 miles from the place they were born. Roads varied from almost a path to dangerously close to a ditch. And no, there were no roadside inns with soft beds and warm tea. At best, you found a farmer who didn't mind your existence. At worst, you curled up under a tree and hoped it didn't rain. A good assassin looks like any other traveler. A perfect assassin is so unremarkable that no one remembers seeing them, which is motivational in a strangely insulting way. You try to picture yourself as unremarkable, bland, utterly forgettable. Honestly, given the mud streaking your cloak and the blister developing on your heel, you think you might be overachieving already. By midday, the sky begins to clear, and the sun peeks through the clouds with all the subtlety of someone flipping on a bright kitchen light at 3 a.m. Heat gathers on your shoulders, making each step heavier. Sweat trickles down your spine. You stop at a stream to refill your water flask, watching the current swirl around smooth stones and splash your face. The water is icy, startling, but refreshing enough to keep you moving. As you sit on the bank, chewing a piece of tough travel bread, which somehow tastes both dry and damp, you remember a quirky fragment of knowledge your instructor once muttered: that medieval travelers sometimes stuffed dry moss into their shoes to absorb sweat and ease the friction. You consider trying it, mostly because your current blister situation is approaching spiritual suffering. But the moss looks suspiciously like it would become a micro-ecosystem within 5 minutes, so you decide to make do. You press on. By late afternoon, the forest path widens into a rough dirt road. Wheel ruts cut deep into the ground. You pass a farmer pushing a cart of turnips who gives you a polite nod and continues muttering angrily to his donkey. The animal looks back at you as if to say, "Trust me, we're both victims here." You almost wave. The road stretches endlessly ahead. Your feet ache in ways you didn't know feet could ache. Your shoulders are sore, your cloak is coated in dust, and you're fairly certain a spider marched boldly across your neck earlier, possibly claiming you as its new homeland. But you continue walking, because that's what assassins do. Quietly, patiently, without ceremony. This is also when you remember one of the more debated aspects of medieval travel, whether travelers truly walked as slowly as the records suggest. Historians still argue whether those daily distance estimates were conservative, exaggerated, or simply attempts by chroniclers to make journeys sound more epic. As you limp forward, you're inclined to believe the slowest numbers. If anything, they feel optimistic. A shuffle of movement draws your attention. Up ahead, a trio of travelers approaches. 2 men and a woman, each carrying bundles of cloth tied with rope. They greet you with cautious politeness. Travelers look out for one another, but they also look carefully. After all, the roads are home not only to merchants and pilgrims, but to thieves, con artists, and the occasional bored noble who thinks travel is a fun hobby. You decide to walk near them for a while, close enough to seem friendly, far enough that they don't feel crowded. At some point, one of them mentions wolves farther north. Another complains about bandits near a nearby river crossing. Bandits are a legitimate concern, especially for assassins in training like you who aren't allowed to look intimidating. Your best defense is to appear poor and uninteresting. Thankfully, after hours of trudging through mud and sweat, you look incredibly uninteresting. As dusk begins stretching across the sky, you reach a clearing with the remains of an old fire pit. The travelers choose to camp there for the night, and though you're technically supposed to sleep alone, a lone assassin is a safe assassin, your instructor insisted. You decide that blending in means accepting the occasional shared fire. So you settle nearby, giving them space while still staying within the warm glow. A small fire is lit. Bread and dried fish are passed around. You chew politely, even though the fish tastes like something that stared into the abyss and gave up. Someone laughs about the endless walking. You smile. Your body throbs. And despite everything, there is a strange comfort in the shared exhaustion. When you finally lie down for the night, cloak wrapped tightly around you, pack tucked under your head, your feet pulse with heat, your shoulders ache, and yet the night air is cool, the fire crackles softly, and the stars blink overhead like old friends keeping watch. Traveling on foot forever may be miserable, yes, but in moments like this, beneath an open sky, you feel yourself slowly becoming the thing your instructors hope you will be: unseen, patient, and quietly enduring. By the time the first rays of dawn stretch across the horizon, you've already learned one uncomfortable truth. In the life of a medieval assassin, mistakes are not rare, they are inevitable. Some are minor, the kind that leave you with a bruise, a scraped hand, or a slightly embarrassed ego. Others are the type you carry in your mind, revisiting over and over, because no one will ever forget or forget, and more importantly, neither will you. This morning, for instance, starts with what your instructor generously calls a learning opportunity. You're sent into a mock market to observe and report on the people there, noting patterns, oddities, and potential threats. It sounds simple: observing, watching, blending in. Yet almost immediately, you realize that your innate clumsiness has a way of magnifying itself in public. You knock over a basket of apples, one rolls across the cobblestones with the satisfying bounce of someone conspiring against you. A nearby vendor jumps back, shouting. You stammer apologies, but the apples continue their chaotic parade. You can feel the eyes of every nearby villager boring into your back. And you know, with a sinking certainty, that this moment will be remembered, probably for the next week at least. Here's the reality of the medieval world, though. Minor public mishaps are part of daily life. Vendors spill, children trip, goats wander wherever they like. Your embarrassing moment isn't exceptional in itself, but the feeling of exposure, the realization that everyone has seen you, amplifies it to epic proportions in your mind. It's a quirk of human perception, and medieval life doesn't come with modern coping mechanisms. No mental health apps, no polite distraction. Just you, your blunders, and the world watching, quietly, or sometimes laughing, sometimes ignoring, sometimes just staring. You gather the scattered apples as gracefully as you can, which is to say, not at all, and continue through the market. Your notebook in hand, you jot down notes for your instructor. Red apples roll unpredictably. Oranges, smug, spherical, less cooperative. You wonder briefly whether the apples themselves are testing your patience. They probably are. Historians still argue whether market disasters were exaggerated in medieval accounts to justify fines or taxes, or whether they just happened frequently enough that everyone shrugged and carried on. Your second mistake comes in the form of conversation. A merchant comments on the weather. Casual, light, passing. You, in a rare burst of overconfidence, decide to contribute a small piece of humor. Unfortunately, medieval humor is not your strong suit. You mispronounce a word, exaggerate the tone, and end up sounding like someone speaking a slightly different language entirely. The merchant blinks at you, a polite smile curving his lips, but the corners twitch upward ever so slightly, as if he's trying not to laugh too hard. You feel your face flush and resolve to never speak in a market ever again. Despite these missteps, you're learning. This is the paradox of mistakes. Each one teaches more than success ever could. You begin to notice patterns in the stalls, the way people step aside for one another, the way goods are arranged according to what is most convenient, not what looks most attractive. You see which merchants keep an eye on customers and which relax, leaving themselves vulnerable. You note how the pigeons move when breadcrumbs are tossed, the subtle warning calls of dogs, the soft footfalls of children playing among the legs of adults. Every blunder makes you more attentive to everything else. Your senses begin to sharpen, not magically, not instantly, but gradually, quietly, like a stone being worn smooth by the flow of a river. By midday, the sun is high and merciless. You retreat into the shade of a narrow alley, wiping sweat from your brow. A soft breeze carries the scent of bread baking somewhere deeper in the city, and the faint tang of herbs drying in the sun. You remember that medieval towns often smelled of a mixture no modern nose could ever fully appreciate. Smoke, animals, spices, and human life, all swirling together. You breathe it in, wincing slightly as the sun reflects off a polished cartwheel. Mistakes may sting, but being alive to experience the texture of this world, every sight, sound, and smell, softens the sting. The next mistake is almost poetic. You are supposed to follow a figure through a narrow street, observing how they interact with others. You do so carefully, crouching slightly, staying just out of sight. For a few minutes, everything is perfect. You feel almost invisible, as if you've mastered the art of unnoticed movement. Then, your foot catches a loose stone. You stumble, flailing briefly to regain balance, and let out a breathless gasp. The person you were following glances back, suspicious but unconcerned. A nearby child laughs quietly. You sink lower into the shadows, your pride bruised, but your focus sharpened. Because now, more than ever, you are aware that perfection is impossible, but attentiveness is everything. Mistakes, you begin to understand, are not shameful in this world. They are lessons disguised as embarrassment. The medieval assassin's life is a continuous cycle of failing, recovering, and learning. You write this down in your mental notebook, next to your earlier observations about apples and cobblestones. Every slip is a new data point. Every awkward interaction teaches something invisible but vital. How people move, how they speak, how they react when the ordinary is disrupted. By late afternoon, you are tired in a way that goes deeper than muscle fatigue. It is the tired of having to think about everything, every step, every glance, every sound. And yet, there is a strange serenity in it. Mistakes have made the world sharper, more immediate, more alive. You notice the way shadows fall differently across walls you passed earlier, the way the wind carries small noises like whispers, the way people's hands twitch toward their wares when a stranger lingers nearby. All of this would have gone unnoticed if you had walked flawlessly through the day. As evening falls, you return to the inn where your instructors expect a report. You recount your errors, the apples, the mispronounced joke, the stumble in the alley. And for the first time, the instructor smiles. Not the flat, resigned nod you've grown used to, but a soft, approving smile. Good, he says. You survived. You observed. You noticed what others might overlook. You take a deep breath. Mistakes, it turns out, are the truest teachers. They sting in the moment, embarrass endlessly, and make your feet ache, your hands sore, your cheeks hot. But they are also proof of your presence, proof that you are learning, proof that you are alive in this medieval world that has a rhythm all its own. You lie down that night on your straw mattress, muscles trembling from the day's walking, pride a little battered but sharpened in subtle ways. Mistakes have followed you everywhere, invisible yet tangible, like shadows stretching behind every action. You imagine them as small, unrelenting teachers, whispering reminders that perfection is a myth and observation is the closest thing to mastery. And so, as the quiet darkness of the room settles around you, you begin to understand the subtle art of failure. Not as punishment, not as shame, but as an unavoidable, gentle, endlessly patient guide into the rhythms, nuances, and realities of the medieval world. Night falls over the village with a quiet authority, softening edges and muffling the usual bustle. You move through the darkened streets with care, each step measured, each breath deliberate. The shadows stretch long and thin beneath flickering lanterns, and you notice things you never did in the bright light of day. The glint of a knife left carelessly on a windowsill, the subtle shift of a curtain when someone peers out, the faintest whisper of movement in an alley. This is a world that only comes alive when the sun goes down, when your senses are forced to stretch and extend into the darkness. And tonight, you are its quiet observer. You have learned by now that a medieval assassin's success depends on the ability to move unseen, unheard, and entirely unremarkable. Every alleyway is a puzzle, every shadow a potential ally or threat. You step carefully over the uneven cobblestones, your cloak brushing softly against walls, your breath slow and steady. Your fingers graze the hilt of the dagger you've been assigned. It is not particularly impressive, but it is familiar. In its modest weight and slightly chipped edge, you have found a kind of comfort. It is, strangely, a companion. As you move, you recall a fact from your earlier training. Many assassins relied not on strength or agility alone, but on understanding their environment. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins preferred alleys and back streets out of necessity or preference, but the evidence leans toward the former. In towns without streetlights, where every step echoes, the shadows were as vital as any blade. You navigate through them like a cautious dancer, feeling the texture of the walls, listening to the subtle rhythms of nocturnal life. The rustle of a rat in a corner, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of wind through a broken shutter. You freeze, your heartbeat quieting as you remind yourself silence is your friend. Each noise carries meaning if you are patient enough to notice it. You move on, slow, deliberate, almost part of the night itself. Midway through your patrol, you pause near a small square. The lanterns here have begun to flicker as oil wicks dwindle, creating pools of shadow that seem to shift and breathe. You notice a guard patrolling the edge, his armor catching the light in tiny, scattered flashes. You observe his rhythm, the subtle pause, the careful turn of his head, the way his boots scuff against the stones. This is the kind of observation that separates an apprentice from someone who will never survive beyond the first month. And yet, even as you note each detail, your muscles ache from the walking earlier in the day. Fatigue creeps in, a quiet thief of attention, but you fight it with slow, measured breathing, letting your mind float between the physical sensations and the mental exercise of awareness. There is something almost meditative in this, the shadows, the silence, the small world that exists only in dim light. You begin to understand why medieval assassins often practiced patience above all else. It is not merely about avoiding detection, it is about entering a rhythm, a flow that allows you to anticipate movement, recognize patterns, and respond without thought. In the dark, you are both student and observer, learning without speaking, moving without claiming space. Your path takes you past a row of shuttered homes. A cat slinks along the wall, its eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light. You stop to watch, noting the way its paws press lightly against the stone, the way its tail swishes with quiet intent. This animal, unthinking and precise, demonstrates what many assassins aspire to, a silent presence that moves without announcing itself. You smile softly, imagining that someday, perhaps, your own movements might mimic this ease. Or maybe not. Maybe you will always carry the awareness that you are human, that mistakes are inevitable, that even shadows can betray you. Further along, you encounter the faint trace of another figure, a traveler, moving at the edges of your perception. The footfalls are careful but slightly uneven, betraying fatigue or unfamiliarity. You decide to keep your distance, observing rather than intervening. The night is not yet yours to command. This is not the time for heroics. Survival comes from restraint, patience, and the slow accumulation of knowledge. Every movement, every glance, every sound is a piece of the puzzle. You pause by a narrow alleyway, letting the distant sounds of the village drift around you. Lantern light from a far window flickers across the cobblestones, painting shapes that shift like living forms. Your breathing slows further, syncing almost imperceptibly with the rhythm of the night. Here, in this quiet interlude, you realize that a medieval assassin's greatest tool is not a dagger, not a rope, not even stealth itself. It is attention, presence. The ability to inhabit a space so completely that the world moves around you and you become part of its natural rhythm. A subtle detail catches your eye, hinges squeaking faintly in the breeze. You crouch low, noticing the shadows inside and the pattern of the light outside. It would be easy to slip through, unseen. You could, if necessary, step into a world no one expects you to enter. But you remind yourself of your training, patience, observation. Do not act unless there is reason. Sometimes being still teaches more than being bold ever could. Your eyes drift over the square again. A faint candle flickers in one window. Smoke curls from a chimney. The distant clatter of a late-night kitchen echoes softly. Everything seems quiet, almost gentle.
The night carries a sense of expectation, not threat. You move again, slow, deliberate, your cloak brushing lightly against the walls. Each step is measured, each pause purposeful. The street is alive with subtle motion, and you, for the first time, feel that you are learning its language, the whisper of life in darkness.
Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time is slippery in the night. Eventually, you find yourself back near the inn where your journey began. Your legs ache, your back protests, but there is a satisfaction that runs deeper than fatigue. You have walked the streets. You have observed without being observed. You have moved with care, patience, and an almost imperceptible presence that begins to teach your body and mind what it means to exist quietly in the world. As you prepare to rest, the lanterns dim and the night air cools. You lie down on your straw mattress, feeling the gentle rhythm of your own heartbeat in harmony with the world outside. Shadows, silence, and observation, they have become your companions. Mistakes will still come, fatigue will return, and the road will stretch endlessly ahead. But you are learning. Slowly, deliberately, imperceptibly, you are becoming the quiet presence that survives in the dark. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the lesson settles softly. The night is patient. It observes without judgment. It teaches if you are willing to watch, to move, and to listen. By the time the sun rises again, painting the village in gentle hues of gold and rose, you have begun to understand a lesson that is quieter and harder than any dagger strike or stealth maneuver: the value of trusting what you cannot see. In the medieval world, this is not a poetic metaphor. It is a survival skill. Shadows hide corners, the wind carries secrets, and every soft sound could be either trivial or crucial. Your eyes have learned to scan without staring, your ears to hear without panicking, and your mind to interpret without rushing. But trust, real, steady trust, is something you are only beginning to cultivate. Your instructor greets you with a simple nod. Today, he says, you follow someone without knowing exactly where they are going. No questions, no shortcuts. Simply observe and trust that your instincts and patience will guide you. He gestures toward a figure moving at a measured pace down the road, a merchant or perhaps another apprentice. You are not told which. All you know is that your success depends on following, unseen, unheard, without interference. And yet, for the first time, you feel an odd spark of excitement beneath the apprehension. There is a thrill in the unknown, a quiet anticipation that sets your senses on alert. You step lightly after your mark, paying attention to the rhythm of their feet against cobblestones, the slight sway of their pack, the small habitual movements that reveal far more than words ever could. The world around you is alive in subtle ways. A bird flits from one roof to another. A dog pauses mid-bark and then continues its patrol. A child giggles softly as it chases a stray chicken. All of these details blend into a landscape that you must navigate with patience and trust. You are part observer, part shadow, part whisper. The path leads you through narrow alleys, over stone bridges, and past small gardens where herbs grow in meticulous rows. You notice the way the wind bends the leaves, the way sunlight catches on a clay roof tile, the way the faint scent of bread drifts from a kitchen open to the street. It would be easy to get distracted, to let your mind wander, but you remind yourself that every detail matters. Even the smallest observation could one day be the difference between being noticed and remaining unseen. Trusting the unseen is not only about your mark, it is about the world itself. You learn to rely on its cues, its subtle whispers, its quiet rhythms. At one point, your mark pauses near a well. You stop behind a corner, crouching slightly, and listen. The faint clink of a bucket hitting stone, the soft trickle of water, the distant laughter of children playing tag, all of it becomes information. You do not intervene, do not speak,
do not even breathe too loudly. This is patience distilled into form, the essence of a skill honed over years of quiet observation. You feel a small swell of pride, not for what you have done, but for what you have learned, that you can exist within a space almost entirely unnoticed and still comprehend its full texture.
As the day progresses, the path winds through open fields where sunlight warms your shoulders and grass bends beneath your feet. Here, the lesson deepens. You notice that your mark occasionally glances back, as if testing whether someone is following, and you understand, with a small pang of relief, that you are doing this correctly. You blend with the wind, the shadows, the light. You trust the world to guide you, and it responds. Patterns emerge, sounds repeat. The natural order becomes a subtle map, a guide that you learn to read without effort.
You begin to appreciate the strange paradox of invisibility. To be unseen is not only about hiding, but about becoming part of the environment, respecting it, moving in harmony with it. Your senses sharpen, but your ego softens. You notice the rustle of leaves and accept it. You hear a bird cry and do not flinch. The world is both alive and indifferent. You are learning to trust its cues, and in doing so, you begin to trust yourself. You rely on instincts honed by observation and by small, repeated lessons, each imperceptible in the moment, but cumulative over hours of practice. By late afternoon, the path leads you to a small river crossing. The water moves gently, reflecting the golden light of the sinking sun. Your mark pauses, adjusts their pack, and gazes across the river. You pause as well, crouched behind a low wall, taking in the sound of flowing water, the soft chorus of insects, the distant call of a heron. Everything is information. Everything matters. And yet there is calm here, an almost meditative quality in the act of observing without intervening, of existing without asserting presence. It is here, at the edge of the river, that you finally realize the full scope of the lesson. Trust is not passive. It is an active engagement with the world's subtleties. It requires patience, attention, humility, and the willingness to accept that you cannot control everything. Mistakes may still happen, steps may falter, but your ability to notice, to anticipate, and to harmonize with the environment is the closest thing you will find to security. As the sun dips lower, your mark turns, heading back toward the village. You follow at a careful distance, now comfortable in the rhythm of your movement and the silence of your thoughts. You no longer stumble over stones as you did during your first long walks, no longer flinch at every unexpected sound. The world has become a teacher, and you have become a student who is beginning to understand the language of shadows and silence, of patience and perception. Returning to the village, you feel the subtle satisfaction of a day completed without catastrophe. No one has noticed your presence. No blunders have drawn attention. And in this quiet success, you recognize something else. Trusting the unseen is more than a skill for survival. It is a way of perceiving the world, of inhabiting it fully without needing to dominate, of moving gracefully within its rhythms. This lesson, far quieter than any fight or chase, will carry further than any dagger or disguise ever could. At night, lying on your straw mattress, the river's soft murmur echoes in your mind. You replay the day, not with anxiety or self-criticism, but with attentive calm. Each step, each pause, each shadowed corner has left a mark on your understanding. Mistakes will come again, fatigue will creep in, but you are learning to trust, not only the world around you, but your own ability to navigate it quietly, gracefully, and with patience. And as your eyes grow heavy, you realize the truth that had eluded you in brighter hours. To trust the unseen is to surrender control, to honor subtlety, and to discover the unexpected depth in the quietest, simplest moments. As the days pass and you move more confidently through streets, alleys, and marketplaces,
a new challenge arises, one that no dagger, no cloak, and no careful footstep can fully prepare you for: being mistaken for someone else. At first, it seems trivial. A villager calls your name incorrectly, or a merchant assumes you are delivering a message from a neighboring town. You smile politely, correct nothing, and move along. But soon you realize that mistaken identities in the medieval world are more than minor inconveniences. They are traps, social puzzles, and opportunities all at once, requiring patience, subtlety, and just enough improvisation to survive with dignity intact. You are walking through the morning market when it happens. A burly man with a weathered tunic approaches and greets you as if you are his cousin from a distant hamlet. You blink. You do not have a cousin in this village. You do not know anyone from a distant hamlet. Yet here he is, shaking your hand firmly and smiling broadly. His eyes gleam with recognition, and the gesture demands a response. You nod, smile faintly, and mutter a neutral, almost wordless acknowledgement. He is satisfied, or at least willing to accept your minimal participation, and moves on. You exhale slowly, the first wave of tension leaving your shoulders.
Mistaken identity is an odd sensation. There is a thrill in being assumed someone else, a sort of fleeting invisibility disguised as social engagement. But it also carries risk. Someone may ask for a favor, a debt, or a private piece of information. Someone may follow expectations that you cannot meet. Your heart beats quietly in your chest, not from danger yet, but from the anticipation of your next move. Here, you see that medieval life is a constant negotiation between perception and reality, appearance and truth. Your ability to navigate this invisible tightrope is growing, painfully, slowly, with every misstep. Later in the afternoon, another incident unfolds in a narrow alley. You are approaching a quiet courtyard when a woman steps out, hands full of laundry. She calls your name, again someone else's name, and begins recounting an event from the day before, assuming your presence and familiarity. You pause, freeze briefly in the warm light, and consider your options. Speak, ignore, pretend you understand. You settle on a quiet, gentle nod and a non-committal murmur. She smiles, satisfied that her audience is attentive, and continues. You realize that being mistaken for someone else requires flexibility, a willingness to inhabit a role temporarily, and the art of minimal participation. There is a subtle humor in it, though not loud enough for the medieval ears to notice. A quiet amusement that rolls along your spine, as delicate as the breeze stirring the laundry above your head. Mistaken identities are not only social exercises. They reveal patterns you might otherwise miss. By being assumed someone else, you gain access to spaces, conversations, and movements that are otherwise closed to outsiders. You overhear the minor disputes over household chores, the subtle tensions between merchants arguing over prices, the whispered advice of a mother warning her children about a stray dog or a slick paved patch of the street. Each moment is a lesson in human behavior, a chance to practice observation, patience, and discretion. Historians still argue whether medieval townsfolk intentionally exploited mistaken identities to protect themselves, or if it was simply a product of casual human error. Either way, you benefit. By evening, you find yourself returning to the quiet courtyard where your instructors often review your progress. You recount the day's events, the greetings you did not recognize, the assumptions you did not correct, the minor improvisations you made to maintain safety and discretion. There is no reprimand, only soft nods, small smiles, and the occasional whisper of advice. The lesson is clear. Blending in is not about perfect mimicry. It is about adaptability, careful observation, and the quiet confidence to navigate the unexpected without drawing attention. The physicality of the day also asserts itself. Your muscles ache gently, your feet bear the subtle soreness of hours spent walking, crouching, and weaving through the marketplace. And yet, this physical discomfort reinforces the mental lessons.
Patience is easier when your body is accustomed to small, persistent effort. Attention sharpens when your movements are deliberate, not hurried. And the challenges of mistaken identity, the small social tightropes, teach humility in a way that rigorous physical training alone cannot. You notice these subtle connections, tracing the invisible line between the mundane, everyday activities and the slow acquisition of mastery. By nightfall, you are perched atop the roof of a small outbuilding, gazing down at the softly lit streets. Mistaken identities may continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. You do not dread them anymore. Instead, you feel a quiet curiosity, a gentle readiness to respond with observation rather than reaction. The shadows stretch long, and the village settles into a soft murmur of life winding down. A dog barks somewhere, faint and distant, and you hear the rustle of fabric as the laundry dries in the evening breeze. The city is alive, yet entirely oblivious to your presence, just as it should be. There is a strange comfort in this unremarkable invisibility. You think about the lessons learned so far: patience, observation, trust, subtlety, and now adaptability in the face of mistaken identities. They accumulate like layers of sediment, slow and almost imperceptible, yet solid and enduring. You understand that mastery is not achieved in leaps and bounds, but in the quiet, iterative accumulation of experience. Every nod, every misheard greeting, every misinterpreted glance adds to the map of human behavior that you are slowly, carefully sketching in your mind. As you finally descend from the roof and make your way to the small inn where your straw mattress waits, you reflect on a detail that might seem trivial but lingers in your mind. The faint laughter of a child earlier, misattributing your presence to a relative, a neighbor, a stranger. That single act of mistaken identity feels like a gift, a small acknowledgement that for the moment you have become a part of this world, even if imperfectly. You smile softly, recognizing the gentle paradox of the medieval world. Blending in is not about invisibility, but about participation, adaptation, and the quiet grace of being observed without consequence. Lying down that night, you feel the subtle warmth of muscles relaxed, the faint echo of voices in the alleyways, the soft creak of distant doors. Mistaken identities may continue, fatigue may return, and the road will stretch endlessly ahead. But the day has taught you one crucial truth. To survive in this medieval world, you must embrace ambiguity, adapt gracefully, and trust that presence, observation, and patience are more powerful than any blade. And as the night deepens, the village sleeps, and your eyelids grow heavy, you understand something deeper. In being mistaken, you have learned to exist gently, quietly, and unobserved, all while discovering the nuances of a world that never stops teaching. The night arrives softly, settling over the village with a velvet hush that seems almost deliberate, as if the world itself has drawn a deep, slow breath. Tonight, your assignment is different. Instead of blending into the marketplace, following someone, or surviving mistaken identities, you are entrusted with the night watch, a seemingly mundane task that will test patience, attention, and your ability to perceive danger in absence of obvious threats. You are to remain awake while the village sleeps, observing quietly, listening carefully, and noting any movement that is out of place. You trudge up a set of narrow, creaking stairs to the top of the small watchtower, the steps groaning beneath your weight like they are quietly complaining at the intrusion. The view is modest but sufficient: rooftops, cobblestone streets, and the flickering lights of lanterns that punctuate the darkness. Below, shadows stretch and merge, folding themselves around walls, fences, and trees. Every shape seems alive, moving with the subtle rhythm of night, and you suddenly realize that in the quiet of darkness, nothing is trivial. Even the softest sound or smallest movement carries meaning. A gust of wind ruffles your cloak, and you shiver slightly, pulling it tighter around your shoulders. This is the life of a medieval assassin, exposed to the elements, listening intently, ready to respond, yet expected to appear unremarkable. The paradox is subtle but exhausting. You note the sound of a cat skittering across a tiled roof, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves stirred by the breeze. Each observation sharpens your focus, and each minor note accumulates in your mind like layers of invisible knowledge. Historians still argue whether medieval night watches were more about security or ritual, but tonight you feel the duality of both. The responsibility is real, yet the quiet observation becomes almost meditative. Hours pass with little event, though every passing moment is alive in its own way. The distant chimney smoke curls lazily, lanterns flicker and waver, and faint laughter drifts from a household that refuses sleep. You feel the weight of the night pressing softly against your skin, the rhythm of your own breathing slow and deliberate, in sync with the stillness around you. And then, in a subtle shift, you notice it. A shadow moving along a wall that should be still. Your muscles tighten instinctively, heart rate picking up just slightly, but your hands remain calm, hovering near the dagger tucked into your belt. This is not panic. This is focus. Observation refined through repetition and patience. You follow the subtle movement, careful not to make a sound. A small dog, no larger than a rabbit, trots through the alleyway, nose to the ground. You exhale softly, relief mixing with a small, amused recognition of the lesson. Not every anomaly signals danger. Sometimes it is simply life moving quietly, naturally, unannounced. And yet the alertness remains. In this constant vigilance, you begin to see how medieval assassins cultivated a dual awareness, an ability to notice both threat and harmlessness without letting either sway them entirely. It is exhausting, invisible work, but profoundly instructive. The night deepens. Lanterns extinguish in some windows, leaving only patches of moonlight to illuminate the streets. You see a pair of figures crossing the square, their movement measured, cautious. You consider approaching, but you remember your instructions. Observe, do not intervene. Even now, the greatest lessons come not from action, but from restraint. Mistakes made in the dark are far less forgiving than mistakes in daylight. And so you watch quietly, noting how they interact, the rhythm of their steps, the spacing between them. Every detail is cataloged, stored in your mind for future reference. At some point, fatigue begins to press more insistently against your eyelids. You resist the temptation to close them entirely, letting only brief blinks punctuate your observation. The night, you realize, is patient, but it will test your resolve. The shadows are neither enemy nor friend. They simply exist, and your ability to navigate them depends entirely on your attentiveness. You remember the earlier lessons from your day: patience, observation, trust in the unseen, adaptability in mistaken identities. Now they coalesce into a single, delicate skill: the art of moving through darkness without disturbing it, of noticing without touching, of existing quietly within the rhythms of the night. The night watch also teaches you the small, peculiar joys of solitude. In the absence of conversation, of movement, of urgency, you begin to notice things you never did in daylight. The gentle sway of a rooftop chimney, the faint reflection of stars in puddles, the soft ripple of water in a distant stream. These details, minor though they may seem, become part of the tapestry of your learning. The medieval world, so often harsh and unforgiving in the light of day, reveals a subtle grace in darkness, shapes, sounds, and textures that would otherwise be ignored. You learn that being alone is not loneliness. It is attention, it is absorption, it is quiet comprehension. As dawn approaches, A faint glow begins to soften the edges of the rooftops and the streets below. You descend the watchtower, muscles stiff but mind alert, feeling the weight and value of the night you have observed. You understand, in a new way, that every lesson of the assassin's life, stealth, patience, observation, adaptability, endurance, finds its culmination in this quiet practice. There is no dramatic flourish, no glorious conquest. There is simply the accumulated skill of existing unremarkably and yet fully aware.
By the time you return to your straw mattress, the village is stirring once more. The subtle lessons of the night watch cling to you like dew, a gentle reminder that survival depends not on violence, not on cunning alone, but on attentiveness, patience, and the delicate art of blending into the living world around you. You feel a small, quiet satisfaction, a deeper, more enduring sense of competence than any daylight exercise could provide.
Lying down, the first birds begin their morning song. You hear the faint clatter of carts, the soft murmur of conversation, the distant creak of doors opening for the day ahead. And in that moment, you understand a profound, gentle truth. To observe without interfering, to move through darkness with patience and calm, to trust the world and yourself, these are lessons that no weapon, no disguise, no training manual can fully teach. Only experience, slowly, carefully, and deliberately can impart them. By now, you've come to understand that the life of a medieval assassin is not just about stealth, observation, or patience. It is also about the physical and psychological weight of your tools. The dagger, the rope, the simple cloak, all of them carry a burden beyond their material presence. Each object represents responsibility, expectation, and the unspoken pressure to survive and succeed without drawing attention. Tonight, you are tasked with practicing their use in controlled conditions, a seemingly minor exercise that, as usual, teaches far more than it lets on.
You adjust the dagger at your hip, feeling its familiar weight and the coolness of the metal against your fingers. It is modest, not imposing, and yet it carries an unspoken promise. It can protect, it can intimidate, it can help you survive. The rope coiled over your shoulder feels heavier than it should, as if it remembers every misstep, every time it has been mishandled in training. Even the cloak, wrapped snugly around your shoulders, adds to the sensory awareness required to move effectively. You take a slow breath, the weight of each object grounding you in the reality of your life. This is not a game. This is preparation for a world that notices every mistake and forgives few. You begin with simple exercises, lifting, adjusting, and familiarizing yourself with the balance of each tool. The dagger is light in the hand, yet its shape demands respect. The rope requires careful coiling, attention to knots, and the awareness that every twist and turn might be tested under unpredictable conditions. The cloak, though ordinary, becomes part of your strategy, draping, folding, and adjusting it to move without drawing notice, to obscure your form without hampering mobility. Each practice movement is accompanied by quiet reflection, the repetition becoming almost meditative in its rhythm. A historical fact drifts into your mind. Medieval assassins often carried tools that were deceptively simple, yet profoundly effective. Small knives, concealed daggers, weighted cords, and even mundane objects like walking sticks or staffs could be adapted for survival or defense. Scholars still argue whether the simplicity was out of necessity or clever design, but you notice that the effectiveness lies not in complexity, but in familiarity and precision. Knowing your tools intimately allows for confidence that is invisible to the casual observer, but palpable to the user. Midway through the evening, you practice subtle movements, shifting the dagger along your belt, letting the rope coil and uncoil, adjusting the cloak to conceal emotion. Every motion is deliberate, controlled, silent. You notice the soft creak of the wooden floorboards beneath your feet and learn to compensate, moving with a fluidity that masks sound. The weight of your tools begins to feel like an extension of your body rather than a burden. Your muscles remember each adjustment. Your fingers memorize the curve of the dagger, the coiling of the rope. The world has become softer, quieter, more attuned to your presence, and yet you remain almost imperceptible within it.
A small mistake occurs slightly in your grip during a slow-motion draw. You pause, breathe, and correct it immediately. There is no frustration, only calm observation. The tools, like the knight, are patient teachers. They respond to attention, practice, and respect. You realize that every error, every tiny misalignment becomes a lesson. The weight of the tools is not just physical. It is a reminder of the responsibility that accompanies knowledge, skill, and the privilege of surviving in a world that is indifferent to error. Later, you step outside, moving through a quiet alley to test your coordination with real space. The stone streets are uneven, the shadows shifting subtly in the flickering lantern light. You practice movements slowly, deliberately, integrating the weight of your tools into your steps, your posture, your breathing. Each sound, each sensation becomes part of the larger tapestry. The scrape of your boots against stone, the faint clatter of the dagger brushing against a belt loop, the whisper of the rope as it swings lightly. Your body learns to absorb these weights seamlessly, to incorporate them into movement without conscious effort. A quirk of the night catches your attention. A small cat, prowling across rooftops, seems fascinated by your presence. It pauses, watching you for a moment before leaping lightly to the next building. You smile softly. There is a strange companionship in these creatures, unremarkable yet aware, moving through the shadows with confidence and independence. Observing them reinforces the lessons you have learned from your tools: patience, balance, and attunement to the environment. As the night deepens, you return indoors and carefully store your dagger and rope. Each placement is deliberate, ensuring easy access and minimal disruption to your sleeping space. You reflect on the weight of these objects, not in the sense of heaviness alone, but as a quiet, ever-present reminder of the discipline, responsibility, and patience required of your life. Even as your body settles into the soft embrace of the straw mattress, the lessons of the evening linger, subtle yet enduring. And as you close your eyes, the thought settles gently in your mind. Tools are never just objects. They are companions, teachers, and reflections of the skill and care with which you approach the world. Handling them with respect and mindfulness prepares you for challenges both seen and unseen, in darkness and light, in the quiet spaces of alleys and the unpredictable rhythms of life. Their weight, once a burden, has become a guide, soft, steady, and patient. By now, you understand that being a medieval assassin is as much about mental endurance as it is about physical skill. The slow accumulation of knowledge, the quiet observations, the subtle practice with tools, they all demand patience, a skill far easier to name than to master. Tonight, you are confronted with this truth in its purest, most unavoidable form: the struggle of patience. Your task is simple, almost laughably so, yet deceptively difficult: to wait unobserved in one spot for hours, noticing everything but moving only when necessary. And if patience is the backbone of survival, tonight you feel its weight pressing gently but insistently on every nerve. You settle yourself in a shadowed nook beneath an overhang, your cloak drawn tightly to conceal any shape the moonlight might reveal. The quiet is near perfect. A soft breeze rustles leaves, distant dogs bark intermittently, and the faint clatter of pots and pans echoes from a kitchen somewhere down the street. Your instructions are minimal: observe, notice, remain still, and be ready to act if called upon. It sounds simple, almost boring, in the way the medieval instructors often described exercises meant to teach subtlety. But you already know better. Patience, when fully tested, is far from boring. It stretches time into something slippery, elastic, and almost imperceptible. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours. Your back begins to ache from the stone beneath you, your legs stiffen, your eyelids droop. You adjust slightly, careful not to disturb the subtle alignment of your cloak or the placement of your tools. Even minor movements are deliberate. The world continues around you, birds nesting in rooftops, a soft murmur of conversation somewhere beyond the alley, the distant flapping of a flag. But you remain anchored, a quiet observer absorbing the faint details that others might miss entirely. You start to realize that patience is not passive, it is active, requiring constant attention and tiny, careful calibrations of posture, breath, and awareness. A minor distraction arrives in the form of a group of traveling merchants. Their laughter is low, their boots echo faintly on the cobblestones, and the smell of spices drifts upward, warming your senses. You do not move. You note the way one merchant tilts his head, the subtle gesture of another adjusting his pack, the rhythm of their conversation. Even the smallest behavior is data, a thread that could later inform your understanding of human patterns. Historians still argue whether apprentices were deliberately exposed to these distractions to sharpen focus, or whether it was merely a convenient aspect of urban life. Either way, you begin to see the lesson clearly, but amidst the ongoing flow of the world. Hours pass without incident, yet the passage of time itself becomes a test. Your mind begins to wander gently, imagining scenarios in which your patience might fail. What if someone notices you? What if you misinterpret a sound? The internal tension is subtle but persistent, a whisper reminding you that survival depends on maintaining calm under continuous observation. You learn to acknowledge these thoughts without letting them dominate, letting them pass like shadows moving across walls, until your focus returns fully to the present moment. A soft, almost imperceptible detail catches your attention. A rat, tail flicking, navigates the alley beneath your perch with careful, deliberate steps. It pauses at a corner, listens, and then proceeds. You watch its movements, noting the precision, the alertness, the confidence with which it navigates its environment. There is a small, almost hidden lesson here. Patience is not stillness alone. It is attentiveness. It is presence. It is the ability to notice without acting prematurely, to integrate yourself into the flow of life around you without disturbing it. The rat, in its tiny independence, has become an unexpected teacher. Your arms grow slightly numb, your shoulders tense, and yet you remain poised. Every passing sound, shadow, and subtle movement is cataloged in your mind, each contributing to a growing understanding of the rhythms of both human and natural behavior. Mistakes from earlier in your apprenticeship, knocking over apples, stumbling over cobblestones, mispronouncing a greeting, feel distant now, almost nostalgic, because they prepared you for this very moment. You notice each element, weigh it carefully, and resist the urge to act prematurely. Eventually, the night softens toward dawn. A faint pink light brushes the edges of rooftops, and you recognize the quiet satisfaction that comes from endurance. Patience has carried you, silently, through hours of observation, fatigue, and distraction. You have learned that mastery in this life is measured not in dramatic feats, but in sustained attention, the gentle steadiness of presence, and the ability to remain calm while the world moves in unpredictable ways around you. As you finally rise and stretch your stiff muscles, a subtle warmth spreads through you. Patience, you realize, is more than a skill. It is a companion, a rhythm, a lens through which the complexity of the medieval world becomes comprehensible, navigable, and quietly manageable. Even as your eyelids droop and the first birds call in the distance, the lesson remains.
Survival is rarely about bold action. It is about calm endurance, measured observation, and the quiet strength of waiting for the right moment.
Even after months of careful practice, the fear of exposure lingers like a faint shadow at the edges of your awareness. It is never loud or dramatic, but it is persistent, a quiet hum beneath your thoughts, a subtle tension in your shoulders and spine. In a medieval village where every street, window, and alley can conceal both friend and foe, the possibility of being noticed, recognized, or misinterpreted is constant. Tonight, that fear becomes the focus of your lesson, a subtle reminder that even the most skilled assassin is never entirely invisible. You move through the village just after dusk, the air cool and fragrant with a mingling sense of bread baking and wood smoke. Lanterns begin to glow faintly, their light pooling softly against cobblestones and plastered walls. You feel the familiar weight of your cloak, the reassuring presence of the dagger at your side, and the rope coiled lightly over your shoulder. These tools are comforting, but they cannot erase the tension coiled in your mind. You step lightly, carefully, almost a ghost among the living, attuned to every sound, shadow, and flicker of movement. The first test comes quickly. A villager, returning from the evening market, pauses mid-step and studies you. Their eyes linger for a fraction longer than you consider comfortable. For a heartbeat, you feel your chest tighten and your mind races through options. Smile, nod, shift away, hide. You settle on a subtle, neutral nod, just enough to acknowledge their gaze without revealing any knowledge of your presence. Relief flows quietly as they continue, and you exhale softly. The first small lesson of the evening sinking in. Fear is natural, but controlled response is key. As you continue, you reflect on historical records. Medieval assassins were often feared and mythologized, sometimes exaggerating their abilities, other times understated. Scholars still argue whether the fear attributed to these figures was realistic or largely a product of folklore and rumor. Walking through the dim streets, you feel the interplay of myth and reality firsthand. The villagers' cautious glances, the hushed tones of conversation, the occasional whispered warnings, they all create an environment where your invisibility is never guaranteed, and your awareness must remain sharp. A minor distraction arises in the form of a street performer strumming a lute under a flickering lantern. Music drifts softly, mingling with the evening air. For a moment, your attention flickers, and you remind yourself to return focus to the shadows, the edges of movement, the subtle shifts in human behavior that might indicate recognition. Fear is not eliminated by avoidance. It is managed through observation and preparation. Every step, every glance, every careful pause becomes part of a delicate dance between presence and absence. Halfway through the evening, a sudden, sharp noise, a dropped clay pot, makes your heart jump involuntarily. Your body tightens, ready to react, and then you realize it is merely chance. The fear of exposure is not always rational. It is anticipatory, lurking quietly, ready to inflate a minor disturbance into a perceived threat. You smile faintly at the irony, noting that this is part of the training itself. Fear, when observed calmly, can be transformed from a paralyzing force into a subtle teacher, sharpening attention and enhancing readiness. Further along, you notice a pair of figures approaching from the other side of a narrow street. Their posture and movement are ordinary, yet your instincts pulse with caution. You duck slightly behind a corner, observing. The figures pass without noticing, speaking softly, absorbed in their own affairs. Relief washes over you, gentle and almost imperceptible, yet profound. Each near encounter reinforces the lesson. Exposure is a risk, inevitable and uncontrollable in parts, but manageable through patience, discretion, and the gentle art of presence without announcement. You pause on a quiet bridge, listening to the faint lapping of water beneath and the occasional call of a night bird.
The fear of exposure, once acute, begins to soften. You notice subtle details, the way shadows lengthen across rooftops, the shifting glow of lanterns on the water, the delicate patterns of leaves stirred by the breeze. Fear is no longer a sharp spike of tension. It is a background hum, a reminder to remain mindful, attuned, and calm. Even in moments of potential detection, you begin to feel the quiet power of composed awareness. Toward the end of your patrol, you reflect on the paradox. Being a medieval assassin requires invisibility, yet your own survival depends on recognizing, anticipating, and sometimes subtly responding to the attention of others. The fear of exposure is therefore not merely an obstacle, it is a guide. It teaches vigilance, patience, and careful observation, all within the delicate framework of a world that notices far more than it reveals. You step lightly back toward your resting place, muscles relaxed yet ready, mind alert yet calm, carrying the quiet knowledge that fear, when acknowledged and respected, becomes a tool rather than a threat. Finally, as you lie down on your straw mattress, the village settling into the soft rhythm of night, you allow the tension to ease. The fear of exposure has not vanished. It is part of you, part of the life you have chosen, but it no longer dominates. Instead, it exists as a quiet companion, sharpening your senses, guiding your attention, and reminding you that survival is as much mental as it is physical. The lesson is subtle but profound. Control your response, honor your environment, and respect the unseen watchers of the night. And as sleep beckons, you feel a gentle satisfaction, the deep calm that follows endurance. The fear of exposure, once a pressing weight, has transformed into a soft, guiding rhythm, one that will accompany you through the alleys, rooftops, and shadows of the medieval world, quietly reinforcing every step you take in patience, observation, and subtle mastery. The first tendrils of light stretch lazily across the village rooftops, softening the edges of the cobblestones and warming the plaster walls with a muted gold. You pause for a moment on a low roof, feeling the quiet strength that comes from having survived another night, another set of trials, another set of lessons in patience, observation, and subtlety. In the pale light, the village seems almost peaceful, almost innocent, yet you know better. You have walked its streets, observed its shadows, and blended into its rhythm without being seen. And in that quiet achievement, there is a deep, almost imperceptible satisfaction that spreads gently through your body. As you descend to the narrow streets below, the world awakens gradually. Chickens begin their soft clucks. Carts creak under the weight of early morning goods, and a baker lifts his lid to reveal fresh loaves steaming in the cool dawn air. You move slowly, deliberately, savoring each sound, each movement, each subtle detail. It is tempting to hurry, to rush back to your resting place and the straw mattress that waits like a reward. But you know better. The lesson of the medieval assassin is not speed. It is attention. It is awareness. It is the quiet understanding that even the most mundane movements can teach something valuable if you observe carefully enough. You recall the days, nights, and hours that have led to this moment. The night watch that sharpened your perception. The exercises with tools that became extensions of your body. The moments of mistaken identity that taught adaptability. The patient hours of waiting that refined endurance. And the constant undercurrent of fear that taught vigilance without panic. Each experience is a brushstroke, painting a picture of the medieval world as you have learned it. Textured, unpredictable, subtle, and deeply alive. Historians still argue whether the daily existence of these shadowy figures was more governed by skill or by luck, but you recognize that the truth lies somewhere in between. Your survival is a mixture of practiced skill, careful observation, and an almost imperceptible measure of fortune.
As you walk past a small fountain, the water catching the first sunlight, you notice a reflection in the liquid surface. For a moment, you see yourself not as the village perceives, not as the shadows define you, but as you have become, attentive, patient, and quietly resilient. The reflection shimmers with imperfection, as all reflections do, yet it is undeniably real. You smile faintly, acknowledging that this is the culmination of countless hours of practice, study, and subtle endurance. Your body is weary, your muscles stiff from crouching, climbing, and observing, yet your mind is alert, calm, and strangely light. The gentle rhythm of morning carries on around you. Footsteps, soft greetings between neighbors, the clatter of pots in preparation for the day. Even the wind, stirring leaves and dust, seems part of the lesson. Every sound, every movement, every tiny detail becomes a subtle reminder of the world's complexity and your place within it. You realize that the medieval life of a shadow walker is not only a matter of stealth or skill, it is about harmonizing with the living world, respecting its rhythms, and moving quietly in balance with its subtle currents. The weight of responsibility, once heavy, has softened into a rhythm you can now follow with grace. Your gaze drifts to the horizon, where the first hints of warmth signal the arrival of day. You feel a gentle calm settle over you, a soft reassurance that despite the challenges, mistakes, and persistent fear, you have navigated the lessons faithfully. You understand that each night spent observing, waiting, and learning has prepared you for the uncertainty that will inevitably come. The medieval world is rarely predictable, but the skills you have cultivated, attention, patience, adaptability, and quiet vigilance form a foundation strong enough to endure it. And now, as the village fully awakens, you begin to feel the gentle pull of rest. Your body craves the soft straw, the warmth of a quiet moment, and the luxury of letting your mind drift, free from immediate danger or expectation. You take one final slow breath, letting the calm of early morning fill your chest, relaxing every tense muscle, softening every line of thought. The lessons of shadow, patience, and careful observation settle gently around you, a comforting cloak of knowledge and experience. You lie down on your straw mattress, feeling the subtle warmth of your body pressing into its soft surface. The village around you hums quietly, the early sounds of day mingling gently with the fading whispers of night. There is no rush, no urgency. Even the faint ache in your legs and shoulders seems comforting now, a reminder of what you have learned, of the endurance you have cultivated. Each sound, from the distant clatter of a cart to the soft murmur of a passing neighbor, blends into a calm, rhythmic backdrop that soothes your mind. Your breath slows naturally, deep and steady, as the lessons of your apprenticeship drift like soft echoes through your consciousness. The shadows you once feared now feel like old companions. The tools you carried, once burdensome, now lie beside you like trusted friends. You are aware of every sensation, every thought, yet none demand immediate action. Instead, they coalesce into a gentle reassurance. You have navigated the darkness, observed patiently, and moved quietly through the rhythms of the medieval world. As your eyelids grow heavier, you allow yourself to surrender to the soft pull of sleep. The village continues its quiet stir, indifferent yet protective in its constancy, as if acknowledging your presence without notice. You drift, carried on the gentle tide of accumulated skill, subtle observation, and calm endurance. Even the lingering fear of exposure, once pressing and sharp, fades into a quiet, distant hum, no longer demanding attention. And so, with each breath, slow and steady, you ease into rest, wrapped in the soft rhythm of the early morning, guided by patience, awareness, and the gentle lessons of shadowed streets. The world outside continues to move, alive and unobserved, while you drift into a quiet, deep sleep, calm and secure, your mind at peace. End of script. Sweet dreams.